remember Walter Hushak. Walter was supposed to be speaking back in June when we had that unfortunate storm that passed through. So he's going to be here tonight, and he's going to be talking about bringing a nostalgic look at the B-17 and B-24s during World War II, based on his time when he was active duty as a pilot of the B-24 Liberator. All of us that are involved in the group know that Walter helps out and does a lot for the Oxford Airport, the Collins Foundation. So he's down there doing that and talking to students. He's also been part of the education committee from way before when I was there, going to schools, and he's going to be talking also about some of his experiences there over the years. So we're happy to have Walter. We haven't had him on speaking in our group for a while, so for a lot of the new people, you're in for a treat, and I know he's got some new things to talk about. So Walter, thank you for being here tonight.
6-minute tape of the B-17 and the B-24, and these are the Collins Foundation planes that you folks are familiar with. And it just shows them starting up and taking off and making passes over the field. The passes that they're making for photographers, and I'll just show you that they have the planes posed, because as the planes go up and so on, and they stay at a low speed, and then they tip their wings, and I'll show that to you. But this gives you an idea of these two birds. And we're ready to go, and if we get some sound, you can hear those engines going. Yes, just. Oh, if you can. Who is in the cockpit? I don't know. It's a Collins man. The only time they let me sit in the cockpit was when we were flying down over the Sound, and they said, "Would you like to be not on landing or taking off?" They didn't want to lose their plane. But this plane, this B-24, is vintage of 1939, really, and it came out at the request of President Roosevelt. Here he is taking off, and there's no. I know. All right, no sound is. Yeah.
Tell them how many gallons per hour is flying each engine.
They burns 200 gallons an hour generally, and on takeoff it's come up to 300 or 400 with all the power to get up. This is now Hartford, and I took the shots myself, and you'll see the Capitol right there, and we were on board with the 24. I think I haven't introduced these two school teachers here that are with me today. They helped me unload and so on. And that's life insurance. And I'm taking that with standing in the waist position. So these are not professional. And it's just to give you an idea of what the countryside is. Somehow this tape is not showing the color. Maybe it will on this next one. That's my daughter. You'll recognize her sitting over here somewhere. And she's a school teacher, and she had to go to the window and take some. Actually, this is the waist window, and the window was open, and you could get good shots because of clear. You see some of the rudder of the aircraft there, and we're on our way to Oxford at that time. And there's some of the countryside when we were passing, and it had color. You see the shadow of the plane there for a moment. There you go. They tell me that the shadow of the plane on the ground on a situation like that is the size of the plane. Now the B-17. The 17 goes back to the 30s, early 30s, 33, thereabouts, And it wasn't, at that time, there wasn't the warring going on anywhere, and the hierarchy, the people in charge said, what do we need an offensive weapon for, like a bomber? But so they made, there were probably only 16 made originally, and then a few more, and then eventually they made 8,000 of them. And that's the 24 taking off, and you'll see him come back over for the professional photographers, and the next shots you'll see as he's coming over, I think. And here's the 17 taking off. And this is at Oxford Airport. I'll speak to you more, give you the statistics of the planes after this tape. There's a beautiful shot of the plane taking off. No, that was a wartime 17. He served during the war. Both of these aircraft served during the war and were restored. And there he's coming over, and you see him now just so the photographer can get a great shot, and that's a pose right there. And then the 17 will come back. He'll come over, and he'll be over about 50 feet off the ground. He was really down there. And he'll just come up a little bit and then tip for the picture. There he is. It's a good shot. And there it is. But anyway, let me just give you some quick statistics of the plane. The 1933 for the B-17, and somewhere around there, and they got 16 or 17, and because we weren't a warring nation. But then as the war came on, the president said we needed something more as advisors, and they went to Consolidated, and asked them to build as soon as they could. Now the war over in Europe was on. Then no, it wasn't. It was in 1939. It was just before the war, and they built the first B-24 in 1 year. And what they did, they were, up to that time, they hadn't built land planes. Consolidated was building the flying boats. And they took all the good parts of it, which included a Davis wing, and that doesn't mean anything to you, and I'm not going to take the time to describe it, but it was a high-speed, it was a very good design, and it was very special, and it was secret, and that they put that on the 24, and that's why it could have more range. So what did the 24 have over the 17? They had greater range and a greater speed. Other than that, and on how it looked and so on. But I want to go into perhaps training and tell you what was expected of anyone who flew the plane and so on. And the training period, first of all, before the war, if you wanted to fly for the Army, incidentally, let me just back up. This is an Army uniform, and it's Army. And how did they differentiate? See the little wings there? That meant you were in the Air Force. If you had crossed cannons on there, you were somewhere in the infantry or the people that fire those things, artillery. And if you were a nurse, you had a little N there, and they had Signal Corps flags, I believe. And that's what the difference was. But everyone wore this uniform, in the officers did, and we were very pleased with this uniform, especially when we got it. And I only just mentioned a few things that I never dreamed. Here we were, enlisted men. Then after after a little over a year and 3 or 4 months, we were commissioned and so on, etc. We had 5 different kinds of uniforms that we could wear. We had this one then we had this one with green trousers, and then we have a pink shirt. We call this the pinks, and a pink shirt with a green shirt and other combinations. We really felt pretty sharp when while we were still in the country. But going back on the aircraft, the B-17 and the B-24 were our standbys, and that 24, there was like 8,000 B-17s made, 18,000 of the B-24s. And I read somewhere in some of the material that I am giving to you, I have, generally speaking, I have to read it and see that it's authentic. But the enemy, from what I heard, shot down 10,000 of our B-24s in that 3-year period. And why did that? And I don't know what the losses were on the B-17, but that was the honey child of the public. They just loved the B-17 and everything about it. But now I get back to getting to fly them. You had to have 2 years of college before the war, and then they changed that, and when the war started, you could apply and then pass a test. And there was no equivalency, but the first test was only the first test, and yes, you were going to be, and I did that in December of 1942. And then I was signed up, and that was when I went in, and then went to active duty in February. So they found out that you needed more than a high school education. So they contracted with 100, this is the government, contracted with 120 colleges throughout the country, and they sent us there generally for a 3-month stint. And we didn't go to the classes with the students that were there. We went to the military classes, and it was intensive. Early morning and late in the afternoon, and then you had maybe a parade dress parade or something. They always had something for us to do, and you were studying weather. You were studying map reading. You went Morse code, military, and they got into just a touch there of identification, because once we went later, and that went on for about 3 months, and then we went. Now we still didn't know that we were going to pass and get chosen to fly airplanes. And after that, we went into classification, and it included a discussion with a psychologist. And there used to be some stories about that, some of the questions that they would ask, and I don't know how many of them were made up and so on. But they did ask you questions. I don't remember anything. It was about what your life was, and they probably knew whether you were what you did in your civilian life. And they went through detail, and I don't know, it might have taken 15 or 20 minutes with that psychologist, and you didn't know how. You were just answering the questions, and he didn't tell you anything about it. Then after all that was done, then you were accepted for the training for a pilot. All that took place at college, and that was then. And then now you are going to be you think you're going to be a pilot. So now you take the tests, And you have tests with, you've seen those where you have two, in a little box, you have two poles like the pencils, and you'll have to line them up from 20 feet, and then your color. People, young folks fail the color code. They couldn't tell their colors, and from there, I was one selected for a pilot, and if you weren't selected at that time, there was a lot of sadness there's a book put out by a young man that went through all of this and then became a general, and I don't know the numbers that they had, but when you had the numbers were that 3 out of 5 made it as far as a pilot was concerned, and that's only 60%. Usually, those that didn't make it, they had an opportunity to go into navigation or bombardier, and we had, and I won't go. Our first training was down in pre-flight down in Maxwell Field, Alabama, and we then got into the aircraft recognition, and that was both ours and theirs, and also ship recognition, ours and theirs. That was difficult. You can't. The airplanes seemed easy, but seeing ships, you had to see something significant, and they pointed that out so that you would be able to check. Then we did the difficult thing was Morse code. That was by sound, and that was important. Every officer on board that plane, 4 officers, had to pass Morse code. And you had not only had to pass it, but during your term, and we were overseas, well, no, I'll take that back, not overseas. Just before we went overseas, as long as we were in the States, we had to take a test every so many months and pass that Morse code test. So they were very, very particular about it. Why? Because you might be in a situation where the radio operator may be in your plane or something, and you're the only one, and there's 4 officers when you've got 10 men in there. Now, I want to show you, here is the going in on the B-24. It looks as though it's spacious and there's room here. It's not so. But anyway, 10 men, 4 officers, 6 enlisted men. The 4 officers, pilot and co-pilot. Navigator, sitting up here. He didn't always sit there. He sometimes had a spot in behind on the table there. And then the bombardier. We had a bomb sight that was made. The bomb sites were made here in Norden bomb site, and they were made here. And so on the aircraft, the engines were made here too, for the most part. Pratt & Whitney, R-1830s. Very, very popular engine, a very dependable engine. And Hamilton Standard propellers. Then you had 4 turrets, power turrets. You had a nose turret, you had a top turret, you had a bottom turret, which was extended, and you had a tail turret. And then that's 4 and 4 is 8. You had a radio operator, 9, and then you had a engineer, 10. Now, you knew you could tell what their jobs were, but what about probably the most, I want to say it that way, but an important position was the engineer. Because a pilot counted on that engineer for so much, and he had to do everything. And one of the important things he was doing was the wings would hold 3,000 gallons of gasoline. And you can sit down. And they were in suitcases like so. And there were 16 of them. Now, there was only 4 original main tanks, 1 to each engine, but he had to, in order to get the gasoline out of these were made out of what I call a plastic, and it was probably a little more than a half an inch thick, and it was a sandwich on they were black, but there was another set of plastic inside, and if a bullet goes through, it would expand the inner part of that, and so that it would seal the. Now that's not the hole. Now that worked as far as I knew, but our planes were hit with artillery that with fists. The hole's much bigger, but the point was, but the engineer had that job very, very important, and kept track of where the gas was, and there were sight gauges on the flight deck. Along this with gasoline and production, there is a photograph of, as far as the eye can see, you can pass it around. There was an assembly line on these airplanes. Now, I've gotten ahead a little bit, but I did want to tell you that in flying one of these birds, but this was the second plane we flew in flight, and this was a BT-15, fixed landing gear, but a canopy. The other photo was open canopy, and we had our first flights there and our solos there. That was a big day. Solo, you would get instruction on that in pre-flight, and not pre-flight, but primary. You would get it by a civilian, and he was very kind to you. He was polite. Not so with a military guy. And he, when you got 7, 8, or 9 hours in, he would take you to a field and say, "Okay, take it up and make three landings." And he stood there, and it's like driving a car. You know, when you're first, you remember those days when you had a teacher there and someone there, but when you got in it alone, probably with a car, you were more confident. But there was no confidence. There was confidence, but there was a very wary confidence, because you're flying and it's a different thing. And it was a thrill to do that. And this aircraft was 450 horsepower. The other one was 220. And then we went into twin engine, and then went into the B-24. The interesting thing is, after you've completed this flight training, is that you get the wings that you can fly, and you get the second lieutenant's bars, and you're an officer, and now are you ready for combat? No way. You haven't flown the aircraft you're going to go and fly in, either as a fighter or as a bomber. And that took 1 whole month, 55 hours we got 110 because we went up in pairs, and you had 55 hours touch and go landings, flying formation, and flying and doing things with that aircraft. I mean, you don't do anything crazy with it, but anyway, it was still a work, and each phase of this program, I was just amazed at what we had to do and how it was impressed upon us. And there's a theory, not theory, perhaps, a discipline that permeates you as when the farther you get. First, you don't know anything about flying, generally speaking, and yet you're taught how, and you're also taught not to. The military part of it is not to be a wise apple, if you go with, and that goes a long way. And when I go to the schools and talk, and I hope I can, I know I've got time, but today there's, I don't know how young people are, but they're pretty snappy about things. You weren't that way in the service, because if you were, you're gonna mess something up. And as simple as things sound, the instructor used to tell us, you remember this because your life is depending upon it, and other people's lives if you can't remember. And I just use one simple example. When we were flying the aircraft before this one, it was a single engine, and where were the wings? The gas tanks were in the wings, and there was a 25-gallon gas tank in each wing. And the first thing he tells you, you have to keep on switching you have a control there, and you switch it to the left tank or the right tank. You switch it every half hour, so you use the fuel evenly. And he said, if by chance your engine quits, the first thing, number one, and the first thing you do is you turn that lever to the other engine, because maybe you've run out of gas on that one. And don't you think that in our class we had one or two wise guys who were hot shots, and they ended up in a pasture, and they landed because there was no gas in that tank, but the other tank was full. And when those things happened, they would have an interesting way of teaching others that, and they would give someone who did that a pack of matches, and go ahead, and he'd strike one, he'd stand on a chair, strike one, blow it out, and say, I'm a hot pilot. And he does that 4 or 5 times, and that was taught a lesson. I tell the youngsters when I go these thoughts come to me as I'm telling you, the discipline you have in the service doesn't make you a better person than someone else, but it gives you a dimension that others may not have, that you have. That dimension is how you approach problems, because you're always having problems. We always having problems in flying, and you don't approach it by being a wise apple or a wise guy. And you have to know what the cause is, why it's, and how it's going to be corrected, because you're up flying somewhere, and you have your life and 9 other lives to depend upon it. Now, is there anyone, I don't want to open this up, but anyone?
One quick question.
Yes.
Did you get any training in escape and evasion as part of your survival? Yes,
and that comes later. I have over on that table is, for instance, this was one of our concerns. And when we were flying over water in the Pacific, and you have a water landing, and you didn't, generally speaking, you didn't bail out because you'd have 10 men stretch out over, and you made a water landing. That's the way we were trained, unless if you couldn't, the aircraft couldn't do it, but most of the time you can. And they're very thorough. And while it's a book, when we were overseas, they took us out into an open bay. This was in Kauai, North Island in the Hawaiian Islands. And they gave you a flying coveralls. You didn't have to use your own. And then everybody into the water. And the officer that was doing this, our guys are, well, this is fun, the water is good, and so on, etc., and they're doing things. And he just said, you guys are thinking this is fun. Get out of there. And he put us in a boat. And I wasn't doing that, but our guys, and he put us in a boat, 9 of us, 10 of us, and he took us out in the open water. We were in like a bay. And there, that was the rolling ocean. When you were down, you couldn't see. It was just a rolling ocean. You didn't realize the power behind that. Okay, everybody in. And we got out, and they threw the life rafts out, and then each one had to get. The big problem on a life raft was that if it came out of the aircraft and it wasn't right, you had to ride it because you'd have a flat bottom, and that was difficult to do. And the reason it was difficult to do because if you had your own life vest on, and you had to get on, and there wasn't any handles there, you have to use your own. And 10 men individually had to get on the back, and what you would do is you would stand in the middle and then take a hold of the rope that came around the edge of it, and you get a hold of it and then fall backwards into the water and pull the boat over. Everyone had to do that. And that was one thing. Now you asked about as far as being taken prisoner.
Evading the enemy, yeah.
Invading the enemy. They didn't know where any of us were going. And we had nothing. We knew that we were going to the Pacific. I did my crew training at Edwards Air Force Base, which was Muroc. Edwards Air Force Base is still there, big open base. It's 20 miles of dry lake. But there wasn't anything as far as, and especially we knew we were going to go be in Japan, and we had instructors that had been already completed their missions, and there wasn't anything they could tell us because they weren't prisoners, and all that we knew, the words, the Japanese were miserable. That wasn't the right word, but they were, and I don't know anything about the European, but I had, and he was a part of this effort. I had a man by Frank Petrillo who passed away last January, and he was shot down in a B-17 over Schweinfurt in August of 1943. All 10 men survived. And he said we hid from them as much as we could. We were out in open field, but he says they finally got us, they didn't get us together because and he eventually got in, and they didn't keep you together. They only had the officers were in one group, and then the enlisted men they were in another group, and they were in another building, and you didn't commingle with those, you couldn't. And what he told me also, that you had, if you were English or you were another, you were in other buildings. And he was in Stalag Luft 3, which doesn't mean anything until I tell you that that was the same prisoner of war camp that they made the movie, The Great Escape. And he said that they were digging in there, the English were digging their own tunnel, and he said, we knew that, and he said, we started a tunnel, but we stopped it because we were getting water in it, and I'll just tell you, the water came from the latrine, so they stopped.
Well,
Yes.
who was it around to determine that you were a bomber pilot versus a fighter? How was it determined you were a bomber pilot versus a fighter pilot?
It was determined when you were in classification center. You were going to be a pilot, and then when I knew I was going to be a pilot, but I was assigned another man who was actually a pilot, but I had taken the training for 55 hours. The other fellow, and that was, I was really upset about that. He flew AT-6s. He was supposed to be a bomber, a fighter pilot, and they put him in our plane, and they did that. They did that many times with others, and it wasn't a miscarriage. How when you think about the number of planes and the number of people that were, how are you going to? There were other problems that were so very serious, and he was with us, and I was the only one. If we had any problems, I was the only one that could fly that plane with the 10 men when we were there, until he got some time up. But that was difficult, and I'm not going to find a lot of fault with it because you couldn't be. I couldn't be training him or telling them to, because we had other things that we had to do. We had to have gunnery, we had to have bombing, and we had to have, well, that was pretty much it. And the bombing they would have at Muroc, they would have a house, not a house, but a wooden, what would be a wooden pyramid, and then they would have it marked in a circle, and we would have to bomb it from 20,000 feet. So they said 20 bombs at 20,000. You know, we had to make one run. We had to make 20 runs. That was boring, because you're making a run, and you can't just go. You have to make the run in a certain way, and it may take you, I don't know, with a rectangle, it may take you 15 minutes or 7, because you're going, you have to make a circle, and you can't just go haphazardly, because there were other things. And our bombardier, and then we had a camera on there, and then we were taking pictures. Every time he dropped a bomb, a picture was taken of it, and that had to be, so there wasn't any goofing off that you could do this or you could do that. Now, I haven't answered your question because I don't think that there is an answer to it. But just going on, we went into the Pacific. We knew we were going there. It was in 1944, and we left on Christmas Eve, and the time was midnight, or what, it wasn't midnight, it was 11 o'clock. We had the plane loaded and so on, etc. And our turn came to take off, and they said I remember the number of the plane, 1947. And it says 947, clear for takeoff, Merry Christmas. I didn't even say same to you because you didn't answer them back. But we went to Hawaii. It was, at that time, we weren't concerned about it. We had a navigator that we had run several cross countries and so on. We did the firing toward other planes. We did that with movie cameras, and we had the confidence in the people that we had on the plane, the 10 men that we had on the plane. Out of the 10 men, there's only one left. That's the bombardier.
Did the B-24 carry more bombs than the B-17?
Yes, generally. Yeah, it had more capacity, and it could go farther and fire. Let me go and tell you here a little. In flying from San Francisco to Hawaii, right here, somewhere around 2,400 miles, no problem. And people, if I asked you, I'm sure that several of you have been there, and you think you know the Pacific. You don't, because if you go this far, this is the Pacific, and it's a big ocean. But anyway, that's where we thought we didn't know. They didn't tell us where we were going. They took the aircraft from us, took it, and we had to deliver it up to the North Island of Kauai, and said, you'll go the rest of the way by ATC, Air Transport Command. That was still now the so the Air Transport Command picked us up at, I think it was Oahu, and now we're headed for Saipan. So we stop over here. It's 600 miles, and you've got 3,000 miles from there, and then you're 5,000 miles from the coast. We're bombing Iwo Jima, and that is somewhere around 640 miles up. This map isn't a globe, but then Tokyo is up another 600 miles. So we were somewhere about 1,200 or 1,300 miles. We could get to Japan, but we couldn't really make the thing. But B-29's making. All right, so we're bombing Iwo Jima. Yet they told us that we went up there between that time we got there and D-Day 7 times. It was 7 missions there that we got on that time. And they told us that we have control. Don't worry about fighters. We have the aircraft. There are two. There's the map over there, and they'll show you that there's 2 landing fields there. They're not they're for fighters. Don't worry. Well, we came up there in 18,000 feet, and guess what? 2 zeros came to meet us, not to say hello. And the first thoughts in our minds are, what are they telling us this for? And so they made passes at us, and we were in a flight of somewhere around 12 or 14 planes, and they were dropping phosphorus bombs over the planes, and they were more scary than anyone because they would explode. They wouldn't have to hit something. They would explode and send out fingers. It was more scary than that, but that went on for, I don't know, it might have been 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. And when this occurred, the nose gunner, that's the front gunner, that turret jammed, and he couldn't turn it. And he's there, and that was probably one of the worst planes because he could see. He's got a view of the world in front of him. And you can't see your own airplane. All can you see in front. And that's all he could see. And he started to yell about getting him out of here. And I came on to him, keep quiet. We've got other things to do. You sit there. And he didn't say a word. And he had to, and that wasn't very easy for anyone to do, especially on their first mission. And the Zeros kept on coming in. They didn't, as far as we could, that we looked for bullet holes, anything. They didn't hit anything. I thought, how could they not miss? How could they miss us? And I can't answer that, because the one when one came in, when you're flying in the plane, you're flying I'm flying formation. You're not flying on your own. You're paying attention. But I saw this guy coming, and the plane was spitting the fire, and it gets your attention. Every mission after that, we were never comfortable in going over that island, because we never were hit again. They were shooting, they were sending up anti-aircraft, but and I can't understand how we were at 18 and 19,000 feet. That's generally speaking, 4 miles up, pretty close. And why they didn't hit us now? They did hit other ships in our group before we got there. And to the best of our knowledge, while we were making those trips, there was only one. There was one funeral we went to where they came back, but they crash landed, and the guys died in the landing, and not from the fighters.
Base from which you attacked Iwo Jima, was it Kwajalein?
No.
Where did you take
No,
off?
Saipan. It was Saipan.
Saipan.
Saipan. I thought I mentioned Saipan because we went from Kwajalein to Saipan right here. Now it was 600 miles, and there, that Kwajalein and the island next to it had the B-29s, and they were going off every day to hit Japan. And Japan was about 1,200, 1,300 miles. It was like a 2,600 mile round trip for them. That we saw. And they were taking day after day after day, and you'd see them taking off from those islands. And you know, you didn't have, it's only in retrospect that you can put this together, that I can put it together, because when you were there, you saw all the ships, you didn't know what was happening. You saw all the ships gathering out there outside of Saipan, and no one told us that you're going to be flying up to Iwo Jima on D-Day, and on D-Day we had to go up there 2 days before and bomb it at 5,000 feet. That took, we thought we were very close to the ground at 5,000 after being up at 18,000. And they didn't hit any. I wonder what was wrong with their anti-aircraft, because none of us were hit, because you thought he was damn lucky. And that was 2 days before. The day after, which was D-Day, the 19th, we had to go over it again at 500 feet, 5,000. And in order to get there, the Marines were going to land at, I can't remember whether it was 8 o'clock or whatever, or 7 o'clock. But in order to do that, we had to get up at midnight and be up there and go over it like between around 7 o'clock, before 7 o'clock. Now we're up there, and we're up taking off at night, forming and I haven't. I was afraid of the time. I just want to show you this. When you're in formation, and what does that mean? There's 3 planes, and you're one. Then you're here, and then you have each of those plane. Now that's a 9, but sometimes there's, depending upon how many aircraft they have, they'll put another one. They could put another one there, and also sometimes you have, if many of your planes are in use in your group, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4. You could have up to 16 aircraft. When we got up there, and that was the second time that I had a malfunction. We had one engine quit on us. It didn't quit completely. It was an oil problem, and then you lose power. And that was the second time that occurred, and not on that aircraft. But it wasn't anything that you were excited about, because this was happening all of the time. You can't have that plane is a weapon. It's not a passenger plane that is looked over. It has a crew chief and so on, and taking good care of it. We got up at what we call the initial point, where the bombardier starts preparing for his run, and the engine quit. Now you don't call anybody. The pilot makes the judgment. He makes the call on it, and you could stay with the group if you think you could keep up, and still go over and drop the bombs. And I said, that's not a good deal. And so I said, we're going home. We dropped the bombs in the water. We lightened the plane up. We were able to get it up to, I guess, some 8,000 or 9,000 feet, and we made it home on our own. Never even called. You stay off the radio. You don't call, because you don't let the enemy know what you're doing or what's happening. And we got home, and then when we got there, you make a landing and so on. That's a little, I've forgotten now what I think it was. I don't know if it was I think it was an outboard engine, which you don't like to have an outboard engine go, because there's control. And now, no one told us that the war was going to be ending as far as that, but it took 34 days on Iwo Jima for the Marines to take it. They were told that they would take somewhere around 8 or 9 days. There were 21,000 Japanese on that island. Our Marines made the landings and killed 20,000 of them during that day. They were being buried with a bulldozer. They were just scraping the holes. We lost close to 6,800 men. And the Marines, and we didn't know what was happening as far as, we didn't help with this, thank you so much. But you're all familiar with this. On Flag Day, I take, that was a big time, Flag Day. That was the Marines raised that flag.